At 7:23 in the evening on October 14th, 1943, 16-year-old Freddie Oversteegen walked into a tavern in Haarlem, Netherlands, wearing lipstick and a blue dress her sister had stolen from a bombed-out shop 3 weeks earlier. Dark hair woven into 2 long braids, makeup carefully applied. She looked like she was meeting a boyfriend, not hunting a Nazi officer who'd sent 23 Dutch families to concentration camps in the past month. 52 confirmed kills at this point. 52 Nazis dead because a teenage girl had decided the resistance rulebook was getting people killed. The Wehrmacht had occupied the Netherlands for 3 years. 150,000 German soldiers controlling every street, every checkpoint, every life. And Freddie had just volunteered for the most dangerous tactic in the Dutch resistance, the honey trap. It worked like this. A pretty girl walks into a bar, makes eye contact with a German officer, smiles, flirts, suggests a walk in the woods for privacy. The officer, thinking he's about to have a romantic encounter, follows her into the forest. Then someone shoots him in the head. Sometimes the girl did the shooting herself. Sometimes a male resistance fighter did it while she escaped. Either way, the Nazi died, and the girl with the braids walked away. The Council of Resistance Commanders had forbidden this tactic initially. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. Girls would get raped before they could spring the trap. Girls would freeze when it came time to kill. Girls would get caught and tortured for information. But Freddie and her 18-year-old sister Truus had been running honey traps for 2 years, and they hadn't lost a single operation. 52 Nazis eliminated, 0 failed missions, 0 casualties on their side. The trick that made it work, the thing that separated them from the resistance members who got caught and executed. They never waited for permission. They never followed the plan exactly, and they never ever hesitated when it was time to pull the trigger. Tonight's target was SS Hauptscharführer Wilhelm Keller, 34 years old, Gestapo liaison, personally responsible for identifying and deporting Jews hiding in Haarlem. He drank at this tavern every Thursday night, sat in the same corner booth, left around 8:30 in the evening to walk back to his quarters. Freddie had been watching him for 6 days. She knew he liked blondes but would settle for brunettes. She knew he was married but didn't care. She knew he'd killed at least 23 families worth of people and was working on finding more. She knew exactly what she had to do. Back to Freddie. The tavern was crowded. German soldiers, Dutch collaborators, a few civilians trying to survive by keeping their heads down. Smoke hung thick in the air, the smell of beer and sweat and fear. Freddie walked to the bar, ordered a drink she wouldn't touch, and scanned the room, until her eyes found Keller in his corner booth. He was alone tonight. Good. Easier when they're alone. She caught his eye, smiled. Not too eager, not too shy. Just enough to signal interest. Keller looked at her for 3 seconds, assessed, decided, smiled back. Freddie turned away, made him work for it. The trick was making them think it was their idea. Men like Keller had egos. They wanted to be hunters, not prey. She felt his eyes on her back, waited 2 minutes, sipped her drink, glanced over her shoulder once briefly, then away. At 7:41 in the evening, Keller stood up and walked toward the bar. He positioned himself next to her, close but not touching. Said something in German about how he hadn't seen her here before. Freddie spoke enough German to flirt. She'd been practicing for 2 years. She told him she was visiting family in Haarlem, that she was bored, that her uncle was very strict and wouldn't let her go anywhere interesting. Keller asked if she wanted to go somewhere less crowded. Freddie pretended to think about it. Let the silence stretch, then said yes, but somewhere with fresh air. Maybe a walk. Keller agreed immediately. They left the tavern together at 7:52 in the evening. Freddie led him west, toward the woods near the edge of town. She talked the whole way, kept him engaged, asked about Germany, about Berlin, about whether he missed home. Keller talked about himself. They always did. Told her about his important work, about how he was making the Netherlands safer, about how Jews were the real enemy, and he was protecting good Dutch people by removing them. Freddie smiled and nodded and thought about her mother's Jewish friends who'd been deported in 1942. Thought about the children she'd helped smuggle to safety. Thought about the 23 families Keller had murdered. Thought about the Walter PPK pistol hidden in the small bag slung over her shoulder. They reached the tree line at 8:11 in the evening. The forest was dark. Moonlight filtered through the branches but provided minimal visibility. Freddie had chosen this location 3 days ago. She knew every tree, every path, every sight line. She knew exactly where her sister Truus was hiding with a rifle, 40 meters north, positioned to provide covering fire if something went wrong. She knew the backup extraction point was 200 meters east. She knew she had exactly one chance to do this right. Keller was relaxed now, away from the town, away from witnesses. He put his hand on Freddie's waist. Freddie turned toward him, smiled, reached into her bag. Her fingers found the pistol. Keller saw the gun the same moment Freddie raised it. His eyes widened, his mouth opened. He started to reach for his own weapon. Freddie shot him twice in the chest from 60 centimeters away. The shots cracked through the forest. Keller stumbled backward, hit a tree, slid down. He was still alive. Still moving. Freddie stepped forward and shot him once more in the head. Keller stopped moving. Freddie stood there for 3 seconds, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her veins, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the smell of pine trees and blood. She felt nothing, no guilt, no satisfaction, just the immediate question, where's the next threat? Trues emerged from the trees. She'd been watching through her rifle scope the entire time, ready to shoot if Keller had drawn his weapon first, ready to kill anyone who came to investigate the shots. The sisters didn't speak. They worked fast, dragged Keller's body 20 meters off the path, covered it with branches and dirt. Not a perfect concealment, but good enough to buy them a few hours before someone found him. They retrieved Keller's identification papers, his weapon, his watch. Intelligence value. The resistance could use German documentation. Then they split up. Trues went north, Freddie went east. Different routes home. Standard protocol. Never travel together after a kill. Freddie walked through the dark forest, alone, carrying a pistol that still smelled like cordite. She was 16 years old. She'd just killed her 53rd Nazi, and she had 47 more names on her list. 2 years earlier, May 10th, 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. Freddie Oversteegen was 14 years old, living in a cramped apartment in Haarlem with her mother Trien and her sister Truus. They weren't rich. They weren't connected. They were working-class Dutch communists who believed in justice and acted on those beliefs even when it cost them. Before the invasion, they'd hidden Jewish refugees from Germany in their apartment. After the invasion, they had to move those refugees to other locations. Too dangerous to keep them. Many of those refugees were later discovered, deported, murdered. Freddie never forgot their faces. When the Germans started rounding up Jews in 1941, Freddie and Truus began distributing illegal newspapers, posting anti-Nazi slogans on walls, small acts of resistance, symbolic gestures. Then Franz van der Wiel knocked on their door. Franz was the commander of the Haarlem Council of Resistance. He'd heard about these two fearless sisters spreading anti-Nazi materials around the city. He had a proposition. He needed fighters. Not just people distributing pamphlets. People willing to commit acts of sabotage. People willing to use weapons. People willing to kill. Truus asked the obvious question. Would they have to kill people? Franz didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. But he emphasized the targets would be carefully chosen. Gestapo officers, traitors, people actively hunting down Jews and resistance members, not random soldiers, real fascists, real criminals. The girls asked their mother for permission. Trien gave them one rule that would define everything they did for the next 4 years. Always stay human. Never let the violence turn you into monsters. Hold on to your conscience no matter what. Freddie was 14. Trues was 16. They accepted. The training was fast and brutal. The resistance couldn't afford long training cycles. They needed fighters now. People were dying now. Jews were being deported now. Freddie and Trues were taken to an underground potato shed where they learned to handle firearms. They learned to shoot pistols and rifles. They learned to throw grenades. They learned to plant explosives. They practiced until they were proficient. Their first major operation was arson, Nazi-occupied warehouses. The method was disturbingly simple. Freddie and Truus dressed up, put on makeup, approached the SS guards and flirted with them. While the guards were distracted, resistance members set the warehouses on fire. Both warehouses burned. Mission successful. The sisters learned something crucial that day. Their youth and femininity were weapons. The Germans didn't see them as threats. That made them incredibly dangerous. But burning warehouses was one thing. What came next was different. What came next was killing. Freddie's first kill happened on a bicycle. September 1942. She was 15 years old, a Nazi soldier at a checkpoint, a gun hidden in her bicycle basket under a cloth. She rode past him, pulled the weapon, fired twice, kept pedaling. The soldier fell. Freddie disappeared into the streets before anyone could react. Her immediate instinct afterward? She wanted to go back and help him, to undo what she'd done. That instinct never left her. Every time she killed someone, she wanted to run to them and help them get up. It was her humanity asserting itself, the thing her mother had asked her to hold on to. It tortured her, but she kept doing it, because it had to be done, because these were people hunting and killing innocent civilians, because the alternative was doing nothing. Over the next year, Freddie refined her methods. The honey trap became her signature. Here's how she perfected it. Step 1. Target selection. The resistance gave her names: German officers, Gestapo agents, Dutch collaborators who'd betrayed families to the Nazis, people who deserved to die. Freddie researched each target, where they drank, where they walked, what they liked, what made them vulnerable. She never took a contract she couldn't fulfill. Step 2. The approach. Dress nicely. Makeup. Look innocent but interesting. Enter the tavern or cafe where the target drinks. Make eye contact. Smile. Start a conversation. Flirt just enough to seem genuine. The key was patience. Never rush it. Let them think it's their idea. Step 3. The walk. Suggest going somewhere private. It's too crowded here. Want to see the moonlight? I know a beautiful spot. German officers always said yes. They were occupiers. They felt invincible. They didn't believe a teenage girl could threaten them. Step 4. The kill. Lead them to a pre-selected location. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere Truce or another resistance member was positioned with a rifle. Then either shoot them herself or stage an argument with the hidden fighter who accidentally encounters them and does the shooting. Either way, the Nazi died. And Freddie walked away. Step 5. The escape. Never run. Never panic. Walk calmly back to town. Return to the tavern if possible. Establish an alibi. The Germans rarely suspected the girl. They looked for male resistance fighters. By the time they realized what had happened, Freddie was home. Between 1942 and 1944, Freddie executed this pattern successfully at least 50 times. Probably more. Records from the occupation are incomplete. Many kills went undocumented because documenting them was too dangerous. But survivors remember. They remember the girl with the braids who lured Nazis to their deaths. The honey trap worked because it violated every assumption the Germans made about warfare. They assumed women were weak, incapable of violence, good for nursing or clerical work but not combat. They assumed teenage girls were innocent, harmless, not threats. They assumed Dutch resistance fighters were men who operated at night with guns and explosives. They never imagined that a 16-year-old girl in a dress could be a trained killer. That blindness cost them dozens of officers. But the honey trap had risks. If the target became violent before reaching the kill zone, the girl was alone with an armed Nazi officer who could overpower her. If the target suspected the trap, he could arrest her or shoot her on the spot. If something went wrong during the kill, if the gun jammed, if the hidden resistance fighter missed, if German patrols appeared, the girl had to improvise or die. Freddie survived every operation because she broke the rules when necessary. Resistance protocols said, never deviate from the plan. Freddie deviated constantly. If a target became suspicious, she'd abort and try again later. If the kill zone felt wrong, she'd change locations mid-walk. If her instincts screamed danger, she'd listen. Resistance protocols said, always have backup. Freddie sometimes worked alone when backup wasn't available. She'd take the target into the woods, shoot him herself, hide the body and walk home. Resistance protocols said, never use the same tavern twice. Freddie used successful locations repeatedly because they worked. She just varied her appearance. Different dress, different hairstyle, different makeup. The Germans never caught her because she was unpredictable. November 1942. Freddie's 19th kill. The target was Oberleutnant Karl Steiner, 38 years old, Wehrmacht intelligence officer who'd been interrogating captured resistance members at a facility in Bloemendaal. 12 resistance fighters had entered that facility in the past month. None had come out alive. Steiner was methodical. He didn't just execute prisoners, he broke them first, got them to give up names, locations, supply routes. Then he killed them and used the information to arrest more resistance members. The Council of Resistance wanted him dead. But Steiner was careful. He varied his routines, used different routes, never drank at the same place twice, except Thursday nights. Every Thursday, Steiner visited a brothel on the west side of Haarlem. He arrived at 9 in the evening. left around midnight. It was his one predictable pattern. The resistance had tried to ambush him there twice. Both times, Steiner's security detail had spotted the attack before it developed. 2 resistance members died in the second attempt. Freddie studied the problem for 3 weeks. She realized the brothel approach was wrong. Too many security variables, too many German soldiers around. She needed to intercept him somewhere else, somewhere unexpected. She tracked his route home from the brothel, found a stretch of road that passed through a small park, trees on both sides, minimal street lighting, no checkpoints nearby. Perfect. On Thursday, November 12th, Freddie positioned herself on a bench in that park at 11:45 at night. She was alone. Truce was covering her from 70 meters away with a rifle, but if something went wrong, Freddie would be on her own for at least 10 seconds. At 11:58, Steiner's car approached. It slowed as it passed the park. Freddie was sitting under a streetlight, visible, deliberate. She'd calculated that Steiner would notice her. A young woman alone at midnight in an occupied city. Suspicious or interesting. The car stopped. Steiner got out. His driver stayed in the vehicle, engine running. Steiner approached the bench, asked what she was doing out so late. His German was sharp, accusatory. Freddie had her story ready. She'd been visiting her sick grandmother, lost track of time, missed curfew, was afraid to go home because German patrols would arrest her. Steiner studied her face. He was suspicious. This could be a trap. But he was also intrigued. He offered her a ride home, said he could provide safe passage. Freddie hesitated, made it look like she was afraid of him, then reluctantly agreed. She got into the back seat. Steiner got in beside her. The driver pulled away. This was the moment of maximum danger. Freddie was in a moving vehicle with 2 German soldiers. If either of them suspected anything, she'd be dead before she could reach for her weapon. She made small talk, thanked him for helping her, asked where he was from in Germany. Steiner relaxed slightly, started talking about Bavaria, about how different it was from Holland. Freddie directed the driver toward her supposed address. She'd chosen a location 3 blocks from an alley where resistance members were waiting. The car turned onto a narrow street. Freddie said her house was just ahead. Then she pulled the pistol from inside her coat and shot the driver in the back of the head. The car swerved. Steiner reached for his sidearm. Freddie shot him twice in the chest before he could draw. The car crashed into a building wall. Freddie kicked the door open and ran. Truce emerged from the alley, rifle raised, covering her escape. 2 resistance members appeared and dragged both German bodies from the car. They'd be dumped in a canal. The car would be stripped and hidden. Freddie made it home at 12:37 in the morning. 19 kills. And the most dangerous one yet. She'd gotten into a car with 2 armed German soldiers and killed both of them in a moving vehicle. It was the kind of operation that should have gotten her killed. But Freddie had calculated every variable. The timing, the psychology, the escape route. She'd won because she'd been willing to take a risk that no one else would take. In 1943, a young woman named Hannie Schaft joined the resistance cell. Hannie was different from the Oversteegen sisters, more educated, university background. She'd been studying law before the occupation. She had bright red hair that later made her famous. The Nazis called her the girl with the red hair and put her on their most wanted list. The 3 women, Freddie, Truce and Hannie, became a standalone unit within the larger resistance cell. They trusted each other completely. Their lives were in each other's hands every day. They worked together beautifully. Truce was the leader. Decisive, pragmatic. She made the tough calls. Hannie was the intellectual. Fluent in German, strategic, thoughtful. Freddie was the planner. She mapped operations, anticipated problems, handled the most dangerous honey traps because she was the most convincing actress. Together, they became arguably the most effective assassination team in the Dutch resistance. Their work went beyond killing. They smuggled Jewish children to safety. Freddie would walk hand in hand with a child through the streets, acting like an older sister. The Germans never suspected. They transported weapons and forged documents in their bicycle baskets, right past checkpoints. The soldiers saw teenage girls and waved them through. They sabotaged infrastructure, used dynamite to blow up bridges and railroad tracks, cut German supply routes. They distributed illegal newspapers and anti-Nazi materials throughout the region. Every day brought new risks, new close calls, new chances to be caught. The psychological toll was immense. They witnessed horrors. German SS troops randomly seizing civilians off the streets and executing them, forcing families to watch. Truce once witnessed a Dutch SS soldier snatch a baby from its father's arms and smash the infant against a wall. killing it instantly. Without hesitation, Truus walked up to that SS soldier and shot him dead, right there, in front of everyone. It wasn't a planned operation, it was pure human reaction to inhuman cruelty. These were the experiences that filled their days. They lived in constant danger. The Germans offered 50,000 guilders for the capture of the Oversteegen sisters, a fortune. Anyone who betrayed them would be set for life. Yet they survived. They were careful. They were smart. They changed appearances. They trusted almost no one, and they kept fighting. March 21st, 1945, Hannie Schaft was stopped at a checkpoint in Haarlem. She was carrying illegal newspapers and a pistol. She'd passed through countless checkpoints before, but this time something went wrong. They searched her, found the gun and papers, arrested her. The resistance tried desperately to rescue her. Truus disguised herself as a German nurse and went to the prison. She cried, she pleaded, but Hannie had already been moved. The rescue failed. April 17th, 1945. 2 Nazi officials executed Hannie in the dunes near Overveen. According to testimony, the first bullet didn't kill her. She told her executioners, "I shoot better than you." Then they fired a burst. 1 bullet hit her in the head. Hannie Schaft, 24 years old, died 3 weeks before liberation. 422 bodies of resistance fighters were eventually found in those dunes. 421 were men, and 1 girl with red hair. For Freddie and Truus, losing Hannie was devastating. They'd survived, but their friend hadn't. That survivor's guilt haunted them forever. May 5th, 1945. The Netherlands was liberated. The German forces surrendered. Freddie was 19 years old. Truus was 21. They'd spent their entire adolescence at war. They'd killed more people than they could count. They'd saved lives. They'd witnessed horrors. They'd lost friends. And now it was over. What do you do after that? How do you go back to normal? The answer, you don't. You can't. Freddie married an engineer named Jan Brasser. They had 3 children. By all appearances, she settled into normal domestic life, focused on being a wife and mother. When people asked how she coped with the trauma, her answer was simple. By getting married and having babies, creating life after being surrounded by death. But you can't forget. The memories don't fade. Every year on May 4th, Remembrance Day in the Netherlands, Freddie would wake up filled with dread. She struggled with insomnia her entire life. Depression hit in waves. Sometimes she couldn't function. Her son Remy would later say the war never truly ended for his mother. She was fighting it in her head every day. And there was another source of pain. For decades after the war, Freddie lived in the shadow of others. Hannie Schaft became a national icon. Schools named after her, streets, books. A movie in 1981 called The Girl with the Red Hair. Truus gained recognition. She became an artist, wrote a memoir, spoke publicly, received the Order of Orange Nassau, was honoured as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. And Freddie? Freddie lived quietly, raised her children, served on the board of the foundation her sister created to preserve Hannie's memory. She felt overlooked, sidelined. "I have always been a little jealous of her because she got so much attention after the war," Freddie said in an interview. "But then I just think, I was in the resistance as well." Part of the problem was political. Freddie and Truus were communists, and in the Cold War period the Dutch government didn't want to give too much credit to communists, even communists who'd fought the Nazis. When other resistance fighters were awarded pensions, the sisters were initially refused. It wasn't until the 1960s, more than 20 years after the war, that they finally received their resistance pensions. No back pay for those 2 decades. This was the bitter reality Freddie lived with. She'd executed at least 50 Nazis using the most dangerous tactic in the resistance. She'd smuggled children. She'd transported weapons. She'd planted bombs. She'd done everything asked of her and more, and for most of her life almost nobody knew about it, because she was a woman, because she was a communist, because the world prefers its heroes to be men. "Women don't count," Freddie said. "They still don't. That hasn't changed." But in the final years of her life, something did change. In 2014, when Freddie was 88 years old, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte personally awarded her the Mobilisation War Cross. According to her son Remy, that ceremony was a highlight of her mother's life. After decades of feeling invisible, she was finally being honoured publicly. Streets in Haarlem were named after both sisters. Their names became part of the city's geography. In 2016, a Dutch television documentary titled 2 Sisters in the Resistance told their story. International media began covering their story. They were finally getting recognition, even if it came so late. Truce died in June 2016 at the age of 92. For Freddie, losing her sister was like losing a part of herself. They'd been through everything together. According to Truce's daughter, one word was enough for them to understand each other. On September 5, 2018, one day before her 93rd birthday, Freddie Oversteegen died. The last surviving member of the legendary trio was gone. The obituaries that followed told her story to the world. The Washington Post ran a lengthy piece. Major international outlets covered her passing. People learned about the girl with the braids who'd killed Nazis, the teenager who'd seduced German officers and led them to their deaths, the resistance fighter who'd walked Jewish children to safety. But more than the individual acts, what struck people was the larger story, how women's contributions had been systematically minimized, how Freddie had spent most of her life in shadow despite extraordinary courage. Looking back at Freddie Oversteegen's life, several things become clear. First, the courage. 14 years old when she joined, still a child, learning to kill human beings while most teenagers worried about school. Second, the psychological cost. Freddie paid with her mental health, the nightmares, the depression, the inability to escape the war. This is the reality we gloss over in heroism stories. Heroes pay a price. Third, the injustice of erasure. For most of her life, Freddie's story went untold. Not because she'd done less, but because she was a woman, a communist. She didn't fit the narrative. Fourth, the innovation. The honey trap wasn't standard resistance doctrine. It was improvisation, breaking rules, taking risks commanders said were suicidal. But it worked. And it only worked because Freddie and her sister refused to follow protocols that were getting people killed. Finally, the humanity. Despite everything, the killing, the death, the horror, Freddie maintained her conscience. That instinct to help the people she'd shot, to want to pick them up even as they fell, that was her humanity. It cost her tremendously. It added to her trauma. But she never lost it. She did what her mother asked. Freddie Oversteegen didn't want to be a hero. She wanted to live a normal life. But when her country was invaded and her neighbors were being murdered, she made a choice. She chose to fight, with her youth, with her appearance, with her courage. She fought until liberation came, and then she spent the rest of her long life trying to reconcile what she'd done with who she wanted to be. September 5th, 2018. The girl who rode her bicycle through occupied Haarlem with a gun in her basket. The teenager who seduced Nazis and led them into the woods. The young woman who walked Jewish children to safety. The resistance fighter who eliminated at least 50 Nazis using a tactic her commanders called suicidal. The soldier who never told anyone exactly how many she killed. The survivor haunted by what she'd seen and done. The mother who tried to heal by creating life after being surrounded by death. The woman who lived in shadow while others were celebrated. Freddie Oversteegen. She deserves to be remembered. Not as a footnote, not as a supporting character, but as a hero in her own right. As someone who did what had to be done. As someone who paid the price for courage. As someone who never lost her humanity in inhuman circumstances. As someone whose story matters. As someone who counted even when the world said she didn't. Women don't count, she said. They still don't. But by telling her story, by making sure people know what Freddie Oversteegen did and who she was, we can start to change that. We can start to count the women who counted. We can start to honour the courage that went unrecognised. We can start to give credit where credit is long overdue. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favour, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who care about the heroes who got forgotten. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing these stories from archives and obscurity every single week. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching.